In the quiet town of Ravenwood, Ohio, there lived a woman no one truly noticed anymore. Her name was Margaret Hale. At 62, Margaret had become invisible to the world. People saw her as just another old woman, gray hair pulled into a tight bun, faded coats, slow steps. They didn't know that once, she had been brilliant, powerful, and fearless. Years ago, Margaret owned a small but successful publishing firm. She trusted the wrong people: her husband Richard Hale and her business partner Daniel Cross. Together, they betrayed her. They stole her company, framed her for financial fraud, and left her with nothing. Richard divorced her. Daniel testified against her. Margaret lost her reputation, her career, and most painfully her son, who believed the lies. She spent 3 years fighting in court and lost everything. Now she lived alone in a rented house, surviving on a small pension, listening to the whispers of a town that believed she was a criminal. But what no one knew was this: Margaret remembered everything. And she was done being silent. Every night, Margaret sat at her old wooden desk, opening a locked drawer. Inside were files, letters, bank statements, recordings, proof she had secretly collected before everything collapsed. She had been patient. Too patient. One evening, while watching the local news, she saw Daniel Cross on television. He was now a respected politician, campaigning for Congress, calling himself a man of truth and integrity. Margaret's hands trembled not with fear, but rage. Then came the second blow. A magazine article appeared the next week: Richard Hale, business icon and family man. Family man. Margaret laughed bitterly. They had destroyed her life and built empires on her ruins. That night, Margaret made a decision. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to beg. She was going to destroy them quietly, the same way they destroyed her. Margaret knew revenge wasn't about anger, it was about timing. She started by changing herself. New clothes. New hairstyle. A calm smile. She joined community events, volunteered at the library, and slowly rebuilt trust. People began to see her differently. She's harmless, they thought. She's just an old woman. Exactly what she wanted. Using a false name, Margaret contacted an investigative journalist from Chicago. She sent him anonymous documents, small ones at first. Just enough to spark curiosity. Meanwhile, she reconnected with her son Ethan, carefully, gently. No accusations. No explanations. Only love. Because revenge without purpose was meaningless. And Ethan was her purpose. Daniel Cross's campaign began to shake. Questions appeared online. Rumors surfaced about offshore accounts. Richard's company faced an audit. Old employees started talking. Margaret watched from a distance, sipping her tea, her face calm but her heart steady and sharp. One night, she whispered to herself, "You taught me betrayal. Now I'll teach you consequence." But she wasn't finished yet, not even close. Margaret understood one truth better than anyone else: people trusted kindness more than innocence. She began attending political fundraisers not as a guest of importance, but as a volunteer. Folding pamphlets. Pouring coffee. Smiling politely. At one such event, fate placed her only a few feet away from Daniel Cross. He didn't recognize her at first. "How are you, Ma'am?" he asked warmly. Margaret looked into the eyes of the man who had once sworn to destroy her. "I'm very well," she replied softly. "And you, Mr. Cross?" Something flickered across his face. Recognition. But it vanished quickly. He forced a smile. Of course. Margaret Hale. It's been years. Yes, she said calmly. Years can hide many sins. Daniel laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke. Margaret smiled too. But inside, she marked her next move. Ethan Hale was 35 now, successful, distant, and cautious. Margaret invited him to dinner. Simple food. No past talk. No blame. After dessert, she finally spoke. I never told you my side of the story, she said quietly. Ethan looked uncomfortable. Mom, the courts. The courts saw what they were shown, Margaret interrupted gently. Not the truth. She slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was one bank transfer, just one, showing Richard's signature tied to illegal accounts. Ethan's face went pale. This is real, he whispered. Margaret nodded. And this is only the beginning. For the first time in years, Ethan looked at his mother not as a fallen woman but as a survivor. And that hurt more than any revenge. The journalist from Chicago finally called. Whoever you are, he said, this story is explosive. Margaret hung up the phone and turned on the TV. Breaking news flashed across the screen. Congressional candidate Daniel Cross under federal investigation. Daniel's offshore accounts were exposed. Donations frozen. Supporters fleeing. Within days, Richard's company stock plummeted. Lawsuits piled up. Former employees testified. Richard called Margaret for the first time in 15 years. What do you want, he demanded. Margaret's voice was calm. Almost kind. I want you to feel what I felt, she said. Helpless. Disbelieved. Alone. She hung up before he could respond. Underestimated. Ravenwood began to whisper again. But this time, the whispers were different. Maybe she was innocent. Maybe we judged her too fast. Margaret walked through town with her head high. Daniel Cross resigned in disgrace. Richard Hale faced criminal charges. Yet Margaret felt no joy. Revenge had cleared her name, but it hadn't healed her heart. That night, she burned the last file she owned. She didn't need it anymore. In court, Margaret testified one final time. Clear. Strong. Unshaken. The judge cleared her name officially. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked, "Do you forgive them?" Margaret paused. No, she said honestly. But I no longer belong to their shadow. She walked away free.